of deep honor, integrity, and commitment to the highest good, someone who never stops fighting for all of us, even as he has faced his own hell and come out the other side a warrior. A health champion bringing us life-changing nutritional supplements to keep us charging down our own paths, a man who reminds us always to act in our free and sovereign interests, and a father who has paid the ultimate sacrifice for his family and still fights on to this day. David, Stephan, it is an immense honor to have you here again tonight back on Rogue Ways. Thank you so much for returning and for trying again on this other platform.
Hey, well, thank you so much for having me. I sure appreciate it, Lindsay, and it's an honor to be here. So thank you.
Thank you so much. And I wanted to mention, because today I went taking a look at the SoundCloud where the podcast is hosted, and I saw that there are over 3.3 thousand listeners in addition to the people on YouTube. That's just in the past week who have listened to episodes of Rogue Ways. So that blew my mind because I had no idea that it was that many people. And so hello to all of you in podcast land. If you ever want to jump over to YouTube, we have a fun time chatting here on the show. But I also want to highly encourage everybody out there to go to subscribestar.com/rogue-ways and subscribe at the $1 level. If even a fraction of the people who listen to the show subscribed at the $1 level, then I would have the show supported in such an immense way. It would be amazing. I would appreciate it so much. So go check that out. And also, we're doing a compassion fund right now. There's a giveaway. If you donate to paypal.me/Corey Sharman, and you just say that this is for the Compassion Fund, you get entered to win. There's a Howard Zinn graphic novel. There is the Everything You Know Is Wrong by Disinfo from like 2003. It's like retro now. There's Organite plaques and earrings, and the Greatest Forgiveness book, which has some calligraphy in it that you could trace it. It's like a healing meditation. There's all kinds of good gifts. So that money will be used to support people to access services that they can't otherwise access from me and Catherine O'Shea, who's been on the show. She does also pet communication readings and various things. And also, just if we have someone in our community who needs something and we have money in this compassion fund, we can use it to assist them too. So it fits nicely with the theme of this episode that we're going to talk about, because tonight we really wanted to talk about community and how we can come together in community, especially in the time of COVID and what's coming our way down the pike, most likely. So, but before we get into that, I always like to start with the pointless question of the episode, David. So your question tonight is, how do you make sure that you keep balanced in a world that's full of so many demands on our time, which we also were talking about right before the show started?
Wow. Well, I've done a lot of juggling in the past, and I've definitely found myself out of balance so many times in running a large segment of the business, having a team under me. Find myself neglecting the family and all that type of stuff, family time, and so how do I find myself in a balanced state in a world like today where we're tugged in so many different directions? That's a good question, and it's still something I'm learning today, especially now that I'm busy establishing a farm, which is a whole nother beast of its own. Yeah. A lot of it is incorporating, I would say, my family into the projects that I'm doing. So many times what I started to do when I was traveling across Western Canada, mainly on business trips, many times I'd actually take my family with me. And so I got to have quality family time while we were traveling, rather than me just always being away from them or being away from them for months out of the year. And so now that I'm establishing a farm and setting up a lot of preparations, I'm incorporating my children into that process as well, so that I can have that quality time with them. And just making sure that I'm sitting down, for meals with my children, my wife, on a regular basis as well, so that we have that constant communication. So it takes effort, and we have to be cognizant of when we're falling out of balance, and we'll feel it if we're in tune with ourselves. We'll feel that we're out of balance because something just doesn't seem right, and just remedying it. So I'd say just being in tune, recognizing the issue, and finding creative ways to remedy it.
I love it. And I love that idea of bringing your family with you and incorporating your children in what you're doing as much as possible. Just as a teacher, I also think that that's the best way that you can educate your kids, is just have them do the things that you're doing. And as long as you're not, involved in illicit activities or immoral activities, then that's always possible to some degree. And it's always going to be beneficial for them. And I think we put way too much emphasis on traditional education and not enough emphasis at all on real life education, which I think is what we're sorely lacking. And I honestly, the kids who are raised in that way, where they, like you're saying, get to be involved in even business trips or like the work on the farm that you're doing, I'm sure, like these are the kids that end up being the most well-rounded, intelligent, thoughtful, really grounded individuals. And I think we tend to look at this like it's some, bumpkin like way of like, oh, you just don't even care about your kids. You're not willing to give them a good education. I think it's the exact opposite. I think it's the best education that they can get.
I absolutely agree. I mean, we do homeschooling, and so my wife really takes care of that end in relation to the more formal type education, ensuring that they're reading and they're doing their math and getting a very unorthodox style of social studies,
yes.
Where they're not learning false history, but they're learning what legitimately took place.
That's rare.
It is very rare, right? It's not something I learned about till I was in my 20s and recognized I didn't ever want my kids subjected to the falsehoods that I was. And so she takes care of that end, and it's a beautiful thing when they get to come and actually get real life experience, whether it be understanding what it takes to run a business, going to health shows and stuff like that. Like it was just a real joy to, when I was doing all the health shows across Canada, to have my 8-year-old son present at the booth and everything, basically working it in a sense as 8 years old, and so it teaches them a good work ethic. It teaches them to be much more dynamic and flexible. Gives them a lot more skills, and that way when they want to go into a certain area, they can do so with a lot more confidence. And then if that falls through, they have so many more fallbacks because they're not just trained and educated in one particular area.
That's awesome. Yes, I really agree, and I love it. And I think your kids are so lucky to have you both working with that same vision in mind and heading that direction. It's great. Someone in the chat said, "My mouth shall speak the truth." Said, "A stick in the sand, and you can teach a child anything." And I'm kind of that mind too. That we all have, maybe not every single person, but we as humans in general, we have what it takes to educate our children. That's what's been going on naturally forever. The idea that you send your children away to an institution and let strangers handle the complete construction of your child's mind, heart, and soul is a relatively new experiment, and it's a pretty strange one when you break it down. Like, it's very weird.
Yeah, it is. I agree.
So last time we met, we were actually going to be doing this show at the same time as the first presidential debate. And I wonder if that's part of why we got completely like shut down. OBS stopped working. Like none of our equipment was working. We couldn't do anything. I don't know. I'm not sure. I don't think we'll ever be sure, but that's my, there's a lot of other live streamers that night that also got just mysteriously, messed with, or just couldn't do what they normally do. So it wasn't just us.
There's another element too, as well. When I'm taking a look at what's taking place out in the environment there, and when I say environment, I mean what's going on in people's minds and all that. We're talking about perhaps the most important topic of action today, in my mind anyways, in relation to community. And over the last few days, there's been some really huge shifts that have taken place in people. Unfortunately, many of them it's incited fear. There's circumstances rising up, supposed leaked emails and all that leaked information as to what the government's wanted to do. And so had we had this conversation 2 or 3 weeks ago in relation to community, people would have been somewhat receptive and would have maybe liked the concept, but may not have seen the necessity of it. Whereas today, I think we're going to see people are a lot more receptive. And like I said, unfortunately, many of those people are receptive out of a state of fear, seeing what's coming down the pike. But the fact of the matter is that this is a very, very important topic that needs to be discussed, because I see a lot of action taking place, a lot of protesting, all that. But at the end of the day, there's no real plan of action to remove ourselves from the system and claim our liberty, our God-given rights, and to basically walk away from the old and build the new.
Yeah, I love it. It's very well said. And it reminds me that everything happens for a reason and everything happens in perfect time. And so, I like that idea behind why we're kind of rescheduled to tonight by accident, that maybe people are more receptive to it and ready for it. And I also love that we both, I think, are on the same track as far as what needs to be done and why and how we remedy these situations of this kind of runaway power structure that aims to take over literally the entire world. Because I don't think we've ever talked about it before, but I think that we share that common idea of how to go about addressing it. And we never touched on our other conversation, as far reaching as it was. We never even touched on COVID, which was interesting. So we can bring that up tonight too, as well. And especially the idea that this was a planned, long before anybody ever heard the word COVID or coronavirus or SARS-CoV-2 or whatever you want to call it. These things that are being rolled out have been in the works, for a while. And like you said, there's been leaked documents, or even just things that are not leaked. They're just out in the public that point to that as well, that this was planned and far in advance of it rolling out. But the vision that they have for us is not the vision that I have for us. And I don't think it's the vision that you have for us.
Absolutely not.
Yeah. So what do you think is in general should be done in response to this worldwide attempted takeover? And also I want to ask you, are you of the mind that these people have had this plan and been in power for thousands of years?
Well, I'm not so sure about thousands of years. And I wouldn't be surprised. Don't get me wrong. But in the history that I've studied, and I began studying this not to give any credibility, but this isn't something that's new to me at all. I started to study this with a study group back, I think, 2006, and we studied different books like The Case Against the Fed by Murray Rothbard, The Creature from Jekyll Island, and then also just topics on political economy, proper role of government in a sense, even though I kind of disagree with that statement and as a whole, the whole statement of government, but basically the proper lines that allow for societies to thrive, for liberty to be ever present, because as soon as you start to trample on liberty, societies come to a collapse. It's just a matter of time. And so it's nothing new to me, but from my studying of it, it's very, very clear that this has been in the works for at least hundreds of years, and that it's been well orchestrated, many false flags, basically what we understand of history, and this is going to be something that rattles a lot of people, because we all like to think that we're the good guys when it came to World War II. But the fact of the matter is World War II even was a major event against us, the people, for us to even get into that war. And it was based on a false pretense.
Yeah,
it was really a setup. And the U.S. did everything they could to get into that war, and it wasn't for our good, and it wasn't for Europe's good. And no, not everybody would be speaking German if they didn't get into the war. Right, the war was already coming to an end. The German economy was already tanked well before the U.S. got into the war, and the U.S. helped push it for many more years by declaring an what's the wording? Anyways, basically you surrender, and there's no guarantee that you get to live. So all of a sudden everybody in Germany is on edge and doesn't know what to do, because they already suffered for the previous couple decades from the reparations of World War I. But anyways, so we have all these different events, even going to the Titanic and everything, where there is orchestrated events to remove our rights. And these people have been extremely calculated and precise and patient for multi-generations to get us to the point where we are today. And this whole coronavirus that there's no substance to whatsoever. None. And when I say that, I'm an evidence guy. Give me the evidence and I'll form an opinion, and I'll share that opinion. I'm of the opinion at this point that I haven't seen evidence. In fact, I've seen evidence to the contrary, that the coronavirus, and this is going to rattle some people, that the coronavirus is even a real thing.
Yeah. No, they haven't even, we had Andrew Kaufman on the show pretty early on, and he pointed out they haven't even, what am I trying to say?
Isolated.
Thank you. Anything that would show that this is a novel virus at all.
Yeah. So there's a lot of people that take the safe standpoint on it and say, oh, I believe there's a virus, but it's not what we're being told it is. But I can't repeat that statement, because I don't believe there's a virus. I haven't seen anything of substance to say there is, but let's say hypothetically there is. The fact of the matter is, if there actually is, and it's not just stealing the stats from pneumonia and the flu and things like heart disease and car accidents and whatever other crazy causes of death somehow get grouped into a COVID death.
It's so crazy.
Right? Let's say it wasn't just stealing those stats, And that's why we see almost no deaths from the flu in the past year.
Yeah.
Right. But yet all the other previous years, we were seeing deaths. So let's say hypothetically there was something, it's like that. People are saying it's 99.9% survival rate. There's nothing of significance, even if there was a virus. But I have seen no evidence to show that there is an actual virus. And the fact that they're using a synthetic antigen to produce a vaccine for this virus, to me, says that they had to synthetically create something out of thin air because there was never anything there in the first place.
I'm pretty worried about what's going to be in that vaccine, especially given all of the symbolism and markings that show that it's pretty like dark, Luciferian, Satanist. You want to look into all of that symbolism and technology, you can go down that path, and it's pretty alarming, especially when you consider how quickly it's being produced and pushed out, and all of the new like technologies that they're putting in to the actual methods of injection and all of this. It's very terrifying.
Unprecedented.
Unprecedented, yes, on so many levels. And you combine that with what you just said with them, creating this synthetic antigen, and you're like, well, this is insane. And doing it all for like nothing at all. And some people have died, right? But people die every single year from whatever from flus, from cold, from especially people who are already ill and already at risk. And I would guess, and I haven't actually looked, but it seems like the numbers that they die in are very similar to what we're seeing now, maybe even less. A lot of people are saying it's actually a good thing because so many less children and adults went to the hospitals and doctors for that time that we actually have less deaths overall. And I'm like, that's kind of amazing. I kind of love it when they try to pull off something horrible and it like goes in our favor somehow.
Yeah, I did a breakdown in, I believe it was April. I did a breakdown of the CDC's numbers on a live stream that I did. And it was really interesting because what it showed is that, first of all, they were stealing a lot of the numbers from the flu and pneumonia and claiming those to be COVID deaths to get at the time it was 65,000 deaths in the US. And they stole those from the other diseases. But what was interesting to note, because you bring up a point where so many people die due to going into the hospital, just from what's reported, there's over 300,000 deaths in the US every year from medical misadventure, and then an additional 100,000 deaths per year due to properly prescribed medications, right? God. So right there, just from what's being underreported, we have over 400,000 deaths taking place every year in the US from going in and interfacing with the Western medical system. So yeah, what was interesting is when I broke down the numbers, during that time period that all these COVID deaths were taking place, these are new deaths, so these should be above and beyond what we'd typically expect. You had a less chance of dying in February, March, and April of this year in the US than you did in the previous years. There was less deaths during that time than what you would have seen in the previous years.
That's insane. And people were, instead of feeling happy about that, they were like terrified out of their minds that they were going to die. I'm like, you have less chance than ever. Yep. That's crazy.
Yeah, the numbers showed that there was nothing but reason to rejoice, right? That there was less deaths overall,
including for infants. Who didn't get their shots. And I know this isn't a show about masks, but I just today was reading, and I haven't looked into it, so don't hold me to this, you guys, but it's just interesting, and maybe we should all go look at it and research it. And maybe you know something about it, David, and maybe you can comment on it. But they were saying that during the Spanish flu, the people who wore masks actually died at a higher rate than the people who didn't wear masks. And the reason why was because they were dying of bacterial pneumonia. And I have read that, and this part now from this point forward is something I have looked into and corroborated, that people right now are dying from, or getting, I shouldn't say dying, they're suffering from, what is it called? Shoot, it's a staph infection of the lungs. I can't remember the actual term for it, but they're getting it from wearing a mask. You're wearing this dirty, filthy, wet, nasty, like face diaper, and you're breathing that in all day long, and you're infecting your lungs with this material so I don't know if right now people, in fact, no, there was just a CDC thing they released that said the people who were coming in who were sick with this respiratory illness were the people who were consistently wearing masks all of the time.
Not surprised. I haven't looked too deep. I actually try to stay offline a lot. I've got other stuff to take care of. I just need to see enough of what's going on and follow my intuition as to what's going on, which is interesting because the topic we're going to talk about really took place or really grabbed a hold of me even before COVID was a thing. But it was just starting to be a thing, and nobody saw the writing on the wall at that time, not logically because it hadn't really come to fruition. But it's interesting. My first video I did on community and felt really strong impressed to start communicating the necessity of it was actually back in January. And I actually felt impressed to do it before that time, but I didn't want to disclose the community I was living in, not for my safety, but for the safety of the individuals who lived there. I didn't want to bring my controversial mess home to them, right?
Right.
But anyway,
nice
so it's important for us to know what's going on, to keep our thumb on the pulse, but it's also important for us to take some time, have that time of peace to be able to feel the intuition and be guided as to what we need to be doing, and then actively pursue that.
Yes.
So unfortunately, I haven't seen what you're talking about because I'm somewhat ignorant to the fine details of a lot of it because I just don't have a whole lot of time to spend online.
No, that makes me happy that you don't have to deal with all of it or think about it. You're in a better place than many of us, and that's a good thing. And so let's get into then talking about why, especially now in the age of COVID and with all of the like new normal and the society that we see they're bringing to us, why even more than ever is it important for us to think about community and what it means?
Well, we're at a point in time here. Well, okay, let me put it in perspective of what's happening in Canada. So I've received probably a few dozen messages over the last week about this supposed leaked information from the Liberal caucus, stating what their plans are in the rollout over the next over Q4 of this year and Q1, 2, and 3 of next year. And how they've got a well-orchestrated plan to basically tank the economy, make us into slaves, remedy our debt, but with the guarantee that we get the vaccine and all that type of stuff, as well as just basically removal of our rights, make us slaves. Now, I don't know if it's legit or not, but the interesting thing is that from what I've been feeling a very strong sense of lately, even before this came out, is that it kind of serves as validation. I try not to let that puff me up and cloud my judgment on the matter, but it does serve as validation. If it is legit, I now know why I was feeling the way I was feeling, and I'm not governing myself out of fear on this matter because I really don't have that much reason to fear. I'm in a far better situation than 99 point whatever percent of the population, because
plus you have understood fully what your soul is for and what you are here as a human being, and that erases a lot of fear.
Huge. Yeah, don't let me miss that point. That's absolutely crucial, because you can have all the preparations in the world, but the fact of the matter is you can still be overcome by fear entirely because you fear death itself.
Right.
That's the first thing. When we fear death, and that's what they're playing off of. That's how they're toying with us. That's how they've got us attached to these puppet strings. Is they're playing off our fear of death. And as soon as they incite that fear of death, we cease to live.
Yes.
It's that simple.
Absolutely. It is that
so in
simple.
essence, we've already experienced death, right? They've already incited death because our life experience becomes dismal, right? We might as well be dead in a sense, right? Just free us from the misery. So once we get rid of that fear of death, if you have no preparations, that's fine, right? In a sense, you're freed from that fear.
Yes.
If you have all the preparations, then at least you can have proper judgment as to what to do with those preparations, and you're going to put them to good use, right?
Yeah.
And so for me, I'm in a significantly different position, well advantaged over most people out there.
Agreed.
And so in relation to that, though, and moving forward with community and the necessity of it, if people don't want to experience a lot of the atrocities that are going to come upon the cities, and it comes in the cities first, and then it works its way out into the rural communities, and then it works its way out, and you want to know that these people are going to do everything they can to try to corral everybody in, right? It's just that simple. They're going to try, but they always go for the low-hanging fruit first, and the cities are an easy target. And so if people don't want to experience the door-to-door rounding up of people, getting your vaccines, the road checkpoints and all that, the necessity for community is very high. And the reason being is we live as individuals in this society. We've learned to become compartmentalized, where we go do our 9 to 5, we come home, and we live our separate lives from everybody else. We have our spouse, our children, maybe even if we don't, right? We're living individual lives largely, right? And many people, even that are married, are still living individual lives, individual bank accounts, whatever. There's no real unity there, right? And we've been conditioned to live that way. And it is far less rewarding than living in a communal type sense, where we actually build each other up and make our lives easier and more rewarding, right? As we have that much more deeper, abiding connection one with another that's fueled by love, right? Held together by love. So when we come together, or sorry, let me put out the hypothetical. Let's say somebody saw the writings on the wall and said, I'm getting out of the city. And let's say that they even had a fair bit of money. The problem that they're going to face is time, because they can only do so much with that money to get situated and prepared on their own. And even at that, it's going to be far less, they're not going to get situated near as much as if you had a number of people join together with even less money. But they worked together. They brought their ideas together. They brought their skills and talents together, and they were able to adequately prepare, but not just prepare. There's also a sense of unity there that provides protection that you won't get while being on your own. And so learning to live in community with other loving individuals, because like I said, it's love that is the glue that brings you together, and it's love that holds you together, and love that allows you to get past the conflicts that naturally will arise, because we all see the world through a different lens.
Yes.
And so in order to avoid, going back to the necessity aspect, in order to avoid what is coming down, because this is not a dry run like many people have been falsely comforting themselves with, that it's a dry run, they're seeing what they can get away with. No, they've already had multiple dry runs and false flags that have led up to this point in time. They now understand our psychology better than we do. They know what buttons to press to get us to react in certain ways. They're playing us, and they've been playing us in a tremendous way. I've been watching it, observing it over the last little while, and it's almost like we're suffering on a large scale with Stockholm syndrome, where back in March, if they were doing what they're doing today, if they had enacted that immediately, everybody would have revolted and been like, I'm out of here, right? Yeah. But they have just gradually heated it up, turned up the heat, started to boil the frog, turned it down during the summer, got us to be okay with it. We're now pacified. Now they're going to turn it up again. And we keep on reassuring ourselves it's going to come to an end. We're going to go back to normal life, but we're not.
No.
We're not.
We're not.
So we have a choice to make. Do we hold on to the last minute and remain in the cities, hoping to have our past style of life come back, which it won't. And even if it did, it was so dismal. In a sense, we're living disconnected from everybody because we never saw the light of working as community, which I've had the opportunity to experience over the last 5 years, numerous experiences in various communities. And it's been the most beautiful thing. The most rewarding way of life is community. But the vast majority of people don't recognize it, and they don't want to become, they want to hold on to a sense of independence without becoming interdependent, recognizing that they can give of their independence, they have all of these skills, but that things are actually far better when we work together, right?
Right.
And so, that's my take on it, is the necessity of community at this point in time is to avoid experiencing a lot of unnecessary pain, as well as to reestablish ourselves as we truly are, as sovereigns under God, right?
Right.
With God-given unalienable rights that cannot be given or taken by the government, right? So to come out of the servitude of the system and to basically declare our independence and our freedom as individuals under the true creator of this earth. And once we do that, yes, you may find yourself in battle. That's fine. The government isn't going to like that. Of course they're not. But the fact of the matter is that regardless of how you look at it, the government's coming for you if you're a free thinker, because you have no place in the new society that they're about to attempt to establish.
And let me just say, because I know God triggers people sometimes and whatever, we all have, it doesn't matter what word you use. The idea that you are like born into this life and your soul and you came with these things, these rights, and that nobody gave them to you. They're yours because you were born, period. That idea, you just take that. If you need to erase the word God or do whatever you need to do, call it something else, like that's fine. It's still the same concept that we're talking about. And I wanted to add something else too, but I don't remember what it is. Oh, we'll get back to it though. But I love this. I really have been pounding the same message for a while now, that community is really what we need to get back to and work on and connect with other people. And I do think it's hard. I think that you made a really good point when you said that you have to do this in a spirit of love, because people, your best friends and your partner and your, parents, like the people you love the most in the world, you still fight with them. Like you still have issues with them. So you can imagine with people who are like your neighbors or your, kind of almost strangers, or they wouldn't be after this point if you're joining community. But these people, like those problems become maybe even harder to deal with because you don't have that same root of a strong love. But if you're coming at it from this place of love, and I think like a spiritual level of that love, where you really are acknowledging that we are humans together and that we need each other in order to overcome these huge adversaries that we face, that can be a huge way, towards solving some of these problems. Because I think that that's one of the things that really keeps people from working in communities together, is that we face a little conflict and we just kind of like cut and run. We're like, all right, I'm out of here. Like this was too hard for me. and we really need to be able to overcome those things. So do you have any other experiences you want to share on insights about how we work together without those sort of petty issues coming between us and tearing us apart?
Absolutely. So there's actually two points I want to bring up. And I'll list them right now and then I'll go in depth. So the one point is learning to kind of surrender the whole thought process of not property ownership, because that becomes communistic very quickly. And there's a very fine line between community and communism. The fine line is once you end up with compulsion. So the way that I look at everything that I own on this earth, I don't get to take it with me when I shed this skin and I move on. I don't take any of that with me. I'm merely a steward of that for the time that I'm here, to use it either for the embetterment of humanity or to the detriment of humanity. The choice is mine, right? And so once you learn to disconnect your self-identity with your property, you're able to share much better. So I'll get into that in a moment, and the effect that has on community. And the second point is also, even though living in community can be much harder because of increased level of conflict, because now it's not just you and a spouse, there's also a silver lining to it as well, where there's an alleviation of a certain amount of conflict. And I'll jump into that as well. But let me go back to the property aspect. When we join together, if we come in with that selfish nature that naturally gets a hold of us, and we're not really willing to share of what we have, or even receive of what others have, because then you would think that that's kind of compromising your level of independence, that becomes a major wedge or barrier in allowing for a community to thrive. So if we can shift our perception on the tangible goods around us and see that these are merely instruments to be used, hopefully for good, then we're willing to give, and we're willing to allow, so example, let's say you have a community. I lived at a community of about 80 people, and they had it down pat pretty good. There was also some things that were a little off there that allowed for conflict to get way out of control. And so I was able to observe the good and the bad. But the interesting thing about it is you have these families living together. There's probably about 6 or 7 families living together. No, just a little bit more, but a lot of them, 10 kids, 10, 11 kids. So that's how it gets so big, right? And then there's some singles living there and whatnot. And so you have these families living together. And when you take a look at the management of the property, there was good and bad about it to be identified. The good is that, the amount of vehicles that they needed to service that many people was significantly less than what the average people would have, right? Like, so, you and your spouse are living together, and typically you have 2 vehicles, right?
Yeah. We have 3.
You have 3. Okay.
Yeah.
There you go. Right. And so, and the same thing with me and my wife is I've actually got a few more. Some of them are kind of broken down in their projects, old vehicles that will work for a long time once they're up and running. But the fact of the matter is that we have enough vehicles here to run a small community, right? Because I'm not using all my vehicles. It's impossible. I can't drive 3 or 4 vehicles at the same time, right? And so the amount of vehicles that they had per capita was significantly less, and it provided just what they needed. They didn't need any more, right? And so there was a reduced amount of input, a reduced amount of cost just associated with that they were working together. But there was also the downside. And the downside to it was that there wasn't a sense of stewardship. And because it was seen as just communal goods and nobody had any sense of ownership or stewardship over it, there was a level of disrespect to the property, and it wasn't properly maintained. And the individual who's taking care of the mechanics there was starting to get a little bit upset because all of a sudden his workload's increasing because nobody is treating it like it's their own, right? Because it's just seen as, oh, well, someone else will take care of it, right? So there has to be a sense of stewardship applied to all property, but there also has to be a sense of, this is for the betterment of everybody in the community. I'm not going to hold on to it so tight and not share it with everybody, so that we now have to have, rather than 6 trucks here, we're going to have 12 trucks here because I'm not willing to share mine, even though I'm not going to use it for the next 3 days, right?
Yeah.
So there's that aspect. So if we can learn to surrender that what's been ingrained in us, that what's mine is mine, and I'm going to hold on to it real tight, and recognize that these are just tools to be used, and that it's actually in your best interest to allow it to be used by the community so that your life can become easier. You receive a direct benefit from that because now they're going out and they're able to contribute and bring back into the community. So you kind of let your guard down there in that sense, but ensure that there's still property rights. Otherwise, you've now crossed into communism, and the destruction will come. And everything has to be voluntary. So if the community is a beautiful place and has a wonderful vision, I'm going to naturally want to give of myself and of my goods. But as soon as it starts to get a little bit tainted, I should have the right to always pull out and say, I'm not supporting this, right?
Yes.
Otherwise, once again, we're into communism. So there's that aspect. The second aspect is, you brought up the relationships and conflict, and people just wanted to distance themselves. Divorce is extremely high at this point. Most marriages don't work out.
You're talking about in society in general. Yeah, totally.
That's right. Yep. So statistically speaking,
isn't it like 3/4 or something? It's really high.
It is now. So for first-time marriages, I believe it's about just over 50%. And then it's second-time marriages are even higher than that, and third-time marriages are even higher than that. So there's a trend there that says that if you didn't make it in the first marriage, you're most likely not going to make it in your second marriage, and if you get into a third marriage, it's almost a given that you're not going to make it, right? That's what the stats are. And so, but the fact of the matter is, I believe it's over 50% of first-time marriages. So chances are, if you're looking at it from a statistical perspective and not incorporating any other elements into it that would remedy the situation, the fact of the matter is that you're most likely to get divorced if you get married, right? That's how it goes. But it doesn't have to be that way. It's just because we become disconnected as individuals, and we're not living lives that are conducive to fostering relationships that are that flourish.
And we're unhealthy, generally speaking, in our hearts and minds and souls. And so when you try to combine 2 unhealthy people and you're like, go do this for everything, like, that's not going to work very well.
Yeah, fireworks, and they're not pretty.
Yeah, right.
And so in relation to that, though, there's a societal aspect as well that plays into the divorce rate being very high. And that societal aspect, I mean, there's numerous societal aspects, but one of the major societal aspects is that sense of independence, where we're living segregated from everybody else. It puts a lot more strain on relationships. So, example, me and my wife, we have 4 children right now. And for my wife, that's a fairly good sized strain, especially when she's homeschooling. It's a lot of work for her. So there's a lot greater level of stress there. And so then when I come, and let's say I'm off on a business trip or I'm working on the farm all day and I come back in, it's harder to connect because she is wore out, right? That can put a major strain on our relationship, because then, we start to think, well, they don't really care about us. We're not able to connect anymore. We're not the same anymore. We're kind of, it just creates a major wedge in the relationship. We were not designed to live like that.
Yeah.
Traditionally, we are tribal, which is communal, right? So let's say that you had 10 families together. And so now I'm going to take it back up north again, where I was living in the boonies there with these beautiful people. We were going through court, extremely stressful time. I'm preparing for court a lot, right? I'm going through all sorts of medical records, trying to figure out what took place. How did the medical system, where did the medical system fail my son in more than one way? And what are they trying to cover up, right? And so I'm learning all these medical terms. I'm learning to understand different processes in the body and all that, and read medical charts. And so I'm doing that. Plus I'm doing my business work. She's homeschooling, and there's naturally a lot of tension that can arise there. But what was really beautiful when we were living in the community there, and I'm doing this, is that there's other people that would come in and be like, hey, I got nothing really to do today, right? Can I take your kids?
Oh.
Well, all right. Yeah. Like you've got these young women kicking around or whatever, and they'll strap the baby on the back and they'll go and do their chores or whatever, and just take the kids. And so the kids are now learning, they're getting out of the house, and everybody's burdens are made a lot lighter when everybody's working together like that. So yes, there is room for more conflict because there's more people and more conflicting ideas, but there's also an alleviation of the natural tensions that come upon our relationships because we have other people to help support us. So it's a give and take thing, right? It's not just all downside in relation to increased conflict. There are so many benefits. And like I said, when it's done right and when love is present in community, it is the most rewarding way of life, hands down.
I can totally dig it. And I've loved this most of my life because I've been very lucky to have grown up in a place where these types of things were valued. And I didn't ever live in a community like this, but my best friend growing up, her father was, sort of the like hippie generation, and him and a bunch of his friends found these plots of land. They were all, they weren't like in a community together. They were just next to each other, and they just purchased them all, made their own roads in, and they worked together to do that. And basically the idea was we all have our own property here, but we are going to agree ahead of time that we are going to, help each other as much as possible. You don't have to, like you were saying, it's not compelled, but you can, and we should, and we want to, that's the goal. But you never have to. And that just the common areas are, is what you have to take care of together. And otherwise it's all by choice. And it was just beautiful. They always, like, all their kids grew up together. We would all play together. Like, they would help each other. They literally helped each other clear the land, build the houses. Like, all of it was created by them together. And it's just a really nice community. If someone's sick, people help out. If someone needs, money, people help out. There's all types of people in that community. There's some that were kind of like, it's not always doing so well, but like, that's their life. And then there's some that, have like public positions, and just very different mix of people, but they had that in common, that they're all working together. And it's not super similar probably to the communities you're describing, because there was no like communal, and I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but there was no communal like garden area or farm area or anything, but they definitely shared like their tools and, things that you could use to build and make farming areas. But so yeah, I've always had that sort of as an ideal in my mind, but I still get stuck on the part of like, where do you find the right people to do this with? Because there's not a whole lot of people that I can see who have some amount of money to go in on buying land together, and who have the desire to live in this way, and who also agree with what you're saying, where you still have your own things, but you agree to try to, as much as possible, share those things and work together to help each other get ahead. I don't know where you find these people.
It's a tough thing. And I know for me in my life, I had to come to a place of brokenness, in a sense, before I was able to open myself up to the whole concept. I mean, I came out of a place, starting off years ago, early into our relationship, I had all sorts of the toys I wanted and all that. And I acquired all this stuff that I ever thought I wanted. And I grew up in poverty for a good portion of my younger life. Actually, I started off, my dad owned one of the largest property management businesses, and had his own private plane and everything that he would travel around in to conduct business, because it spans so many, within, I think, about 10 hours of all these different properties that he managed for government.
Wow.
And so I grew up in wealth initially, but then things tanked eventually, and we end up in this place of poverty. So I got to experience both.
Yeah.
And so when I came out of that in my later teens and moved out of the house, I wanted all the things that I never had growing up that I saw my friends have. And unfortunately that really took hold of me. So I bought all these toys and, bikes, multiple bikes and kayak and nice car, the fancy car with the, it looked like a gangster car, really, just all this really cool stuff that a lot of kids would want. And what I recognized, and this is where I started to find myself broken, is that it never satisfied. It was insatiable, that I could have kept on acquiring these goods, hoping that the next one would make me happy. But in the process, what I recognized is that I didn't own any of that stuff. It owned me. I became a slave to my possessions. I didn't even have time to really enjoy them. Yeah. Right? I was maintaining stuff. And so what I recognized is that it wasn't the way to go. And so then I started to try to figure out, well, what is all this stuff for? Right? And I kind of opened myself up to a degree to say, am I willing to kind of let it go? Am I willing to search for satisfaction and happiness, joy in a different area, right? Because this isn't delivering. And so most people aren't there yet. Most people are holding on to their goods as tight as they can, because that's a sense of security for them. Who would they be without it? Right?
And so you have to find, been like conditioned with is, I'm going to be here, I'm going to have this type of house, and this is going to be my career, and I'm going to retire like this, and that's my life.
Exactly. So, like, right. They were taught that right from elementary school, right? Like you gotta get good grades here so you can go into junior high and high school and then into college and get the good job so you can get the good stuff and get the good house. And right. We were taught that from the very beginning, and it was a lie. Yeah. It never delivered. I would rather be a poor man with my family, enjoying our time together around a campfire.
Yes.
Than the rich man on the hill with all of the goods, working my backside off, and even maybe a little bit enslaved to some debt, or maybe I'm independent, financially independent, but disconnected from my children because of everything that I've had to acquire and the lifestyle I've had to maintain to hold on to those goods. I'd rather be poor with nothing, sitting around campfire with my children. It's much more rewarding, right?
Absolutely.
And so, but it took a while for me to get to that place. And that's where we need to come to, is that we need to learn to let go of those material possessions in that sense. And that sense of pride where we think that because we have a little more money, we're better than somebody else, we're able to look down on them, and just recognize that we're all on this journey together. And some of us have great talents in this area, and that we all, when we come together, we make a whole. Yeah. That we are far better. Like I like doing mechanical work. I'm not that good at it, right? I like to do a little bit of carpentry, but I'm not that good at it, right? I'm well versed in the natural health area, that I can be an instrument in blessing a lot of people in relation to achieving a much greater level of mental well-being, as well as just overall health, boosting their immune system. And so we all have different gifts and talents, regardless of the fact that I'd love to do everything.
Yeah.
If I brought somebody in onto the property here that was mechanically minded and somebody who knew how to do carpentry, this place would flourish far better than just me doing it on my own, right? Yeah. Their talents, though, maybe excellent in one way, but maybe extremely lacking in another way. Maybe they know nothing about nutrition or anything like that. I could naturally look down on them and say, wow, as if you don't know this. Like, where have you been all your life, right? Like, you're eating GMOs and all this type of stuff, right? But the fact of the matter is that we are all blessed in different ways. And when we combine those talents, life becomes a lot easier, and we begin to flourish as a people when we join together for a common cause, common goal, working together and just making community. And so we're at that place in society right now, in history, where we really have to begin looking at doing that out of necessity, not just because it's the right way to live, the better way to live, but because it's absolutely necessary, unless you've got a lot of money and you think that you can go do it on your own. But yeah. Here I am, and I'm doing it on my own right now because, like you say, it's hard to find those people. Not just finding people that you're willing to accept. It's hard to find people that are willing
to do it.
Do it.
Yeah, it's true. No, it's totally true. And I have been going back and forth because actually in my community that, is around rogue ways, and in the Facebook group I have Eyes Open, we talk about this. We've talked about this for years. We're like, the best thing we could do would be to all live in communities that are intentional like this and that want to support each other and work together to create, and help protect each other and take care of each other and all of these things. But again, having the money, finding the right place, and getting everyone to actually do it, and like all these things are their own stumbling blocks. So I want to talk about like what you have done and what you are doing and what your sort of idea of how that could go is. But I also wanted to go back to that idea that you kind of broke, and you kind of reached a point where you kind of broke your idea of what life was about and what you needed. And I do think that sometimes it's hard to imagine that for people, like, what would my life be like if it were radically different? What if I didn't need, this car, that job, this house, and whatever these ideas we've created for ourselves are. And it's hard to imagine that, but sometimes you have to get there to realize that it's not what you wanted after all. And that's what happened to me. And I, finally got like my dream house, and I had the job that I'd always wanted and everything. And I was like, wow, this is actually not fulfilling at all. Like, it's fulfilling. I am not saying it's totally worthless, but it was just not in my head. I was like, that's the day I'll have arrived and everything will be perfect. And it's like, no, it's still exactly the same as everything else has been, actually. So so there is something else, and that wasn't it. So sometimes you have to get there to realize that. But hopefully if you're out there listening, you don't have to get there to realize that, because hopefully you can kind of imagine, if you haven't before, now, what would it be like if you did get all those things and you felt and thought and did and behaved all the exact same ways that you are right now? Like, what then? And then ask yourself, like, what should be different? And I have come to that conclusion that living in a community is what's actually missing and what's lacking and what most of us are searching for without knowing it, and what's been sort of hidden from us and taken from us, like you said. And that it's the primary sort of goal, and but more importantly, it's what will get humans through this onslaught of, New World Order, whatever you want to call it, that seems to be coming our way. And so also one of the things is that as they're pushing all of these things, and they're sort of forcing those situations that would hopefully get you to stop and wonder, what am I doing? And what is all this for? And what could be better than this? And so there's that, again, like we said earlier, sometimes what they're doing is actually in a way serving us. If we can take it that way, and if we can like find that silver lining and ride that edge of the wave. So I like that. I like that we could be sort of pushed towards this without necessarily us meaning to be. But yeah, somewhere in there I had a question. Or if there's anything that it made you think of, you can just take it away. But maybe
I know you were talking about the brokenness part, where I began to see things a little bit differently in relation to what was satisfactory in life. I don't know if that's where your question was, but yeah, there's a few things that have popped up there. The one statement pops up that it's not just good enough to be awake. We got to get up and do something, right? Yeah. And this has served to awaken a lot of people. A lot of people who are not awake at all to the government corruption, to vaccine corruption, all that type of stuff. This has served to awake a lot of people, but that doesn't do any good whatsoever if it is not properly acted upon. It's that simple, right? All you're going to have, look, in Nazi Germany, if everybody was awakened to the situation of the concentration camps coming into play, and that people are going to be shipped off by rail car to those camps, it wouldn't have made any difference, because they were all still segregated, and they were all going to be rounded up one family at a time and thrown into those box cars and taken to the concentration camps. So even if everybody was awakened to the situation, it wouldn't have made any difference whatsoever in the outcome unless they properly acted upon it. And so identifying the proper action is absolutely necessary. I'm seeing a lot of people protesting right now. Great. But if your sole purpose for protesting is just to protest the government, one, all you're doing is acknowledging their authority over you as slaves. Yeah. Right? That's all it is. And second to that, they've already calculated this out. They knew they were going to protest. Yeah. Guess what? Look, when you have, let's say you have a family of 7 kids sitting around the kitchen table, and they have an insurrection against their parents, and they say, we don't like the way this is. Well, guess what? At the end of the day, the parents get to say, well,
Yeah.
you're in my house, you eat my food, you experience warm sleeps because we provide the necessities here for fuel to come into the home and all that. You have heat because of us.
Yeah.
The fact of the matter is that the vast majority of us are equally as dependent in the very same ways on the government as what our children are. We want to eat, we're dependent on their food supply chain. We want heat coming into the house, we're dependent on their fuel continually coming in. And they have control over all of these things. So when we rile up and we protest and say, government, we don't like what you're doing, our government, and we acknowledge their authority over us, they shut us down.
They literally in California shut down the water and the heat and the electricity to places where they weren't doing what they wanted them to do. So, you know, your point magnified.
We have no power when we have already given our power over to them. Our power is in reclaiming our liberty and living self-sufficiently, not under the government. That's the only time that we are going to have any clout or any cards to bring to the table of negotiations with the government. But right now, us protesting, we're just saying we don't like what you're doing. But the fact of the matter is, they say, well, we don't care whether you like what we're doing or not. We control you. You need food. You need fuel. You're not prepared. You're fully dependent on us. You're going to be good citizens.
Yes.
Right?
And most people are going to roll over and do it if they haven't had this vision and this idea to take these other actions. And, you know, as simply as I could do it this year, I was like, well, I'll have a garden, I have chickens, and I have a water filter. There's a river a couple miles away. Like, I'll have food and water, hopefully enough to survive. But it's not really good enough for me. You know, in my mind, I'm like, this is still very tenuous. It's just me alone in this pretty urban area. And, you know, and I've you know, been encouraging people on the show and myself in real life to reach out to our neighbors and connect. So at least you have a network of people who might be able to work together in some way. You know, if you don't even know your neighbors, then you're going to be screwed when the electricity gets shut down or the water gets shut off or whatever it is. If you know them, at least you have that network. But even that, I'm like, this is all very tenuous. And what you're describing is much more sustainable and much more able to resist that sort of outside influence. So yeah. Maybe help us understand like how people can reach more closer to the type of thing you're doing and what it actually looks like.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's actually where I was going to go. In talking about the community up north, like I said, they were the ones that had it down pat, probably the best I've ever seen in all my travels. I've seen different communities living together, seeing the beauty of it and all that. But when it comes to self-sufficiency and not being reliant on the government, what I was going to say is when I was living up there, we moved just as the whole COVID hoax began. And we felt impressed to move where we were moving. And I was just asking, I was saying, God, why are you sending us out of this place at this particular time when it actually seems more logical to be here? And the reason why it's logical to be there is that realistically, it almost made no difference. Everything that's going on in society almost made no difference to them whatsoever. The only issue that they encountered was that the biodiesel that they were producing, they were reliant on French fry oil from the restaurants. And when the restaurants got shut down, their supply of biodiesel went down significantly. They didn't have the oil to produce the biodiesel as much. And so they would have had to find other means. But the fact of the matter is that everything could have shut off immediately. They could have, you know, the supply chain for food could have been shut down immediately. Our fuel could have been shut down immediately. And they still would have been able to exist. They would have just had to change a few small things in relation to their lifestyle, but they still would have had all the food they needed. They would have had all the fuel they needed, right, to heat their homes. I'm talking fuel, wood, and all that, because they have buildings full of wood. They lived around the forest. They'd extracted themselves. Yeah, they'd have to change the way that they extract the fuel the wood, because eventually they wouldn't have fuel for their chainsaws. So they'd have to go back to living like lumberjacks. But the fact of the matter is, these are hardworking individuals that have an intense work ethic that they would do it, and they have the equipment to do it. And so how do we achieve that? What we need to identify first and foremost is our reliances on the government. What are we most reliant on? What are our basic necessities, and are we reliant on the government? So, okay, the first thing is going to be probably water. You're going to look at water. Okay, where is it coming from? Understand that.
Yeah.
If it's coming just out of your tap, and that's how connected you are to your water supply, chances are somebody else is controlling your water supply, right? I mean, there was a podcast, not a podcast, a live stream I did about probably 3.5, 4 months ago, and it was about an hour before that. I mentioned it in the it was talking about community, talking about coming out of the system, and all of that. And I mentioned that morning I went and turned on the tap, and I didn't have any water, but in about 10 minutes I had water up and going again because I understood the full process of how I get water to my tap. Right? I controlled the water coming into my house. Yes. I know the full process. Nobody else can come in and interfere unless they're coming onto my property and tampering, and something else is going to happen that they're not going to like, right? Yeah. That's simple. And so I understand the process. Most people are fully disconnected from it, and they just rely on that. So that's the first thing. Observing that, then figuring out, what do I need to do to have control over that? How can I be self-sufficient water-wise? And then, so mapping that process out. Then mapping out the process of food. Where does my food come from? I mean, I open up the fridge and it's there, right? Well, is it because your wife is going and buying the food and it just magically appears in the fridge? Mm-hmm. No, right? It's coming from somewhere else. So how do we become self-sufficient that way? Map out the process. How big of greenhouses do I need? Or how big of a garden do I need? And what do I need to store the food, right? Mapping out that process. And what you can identify through the entirety of this process is that it's a little onerous, and this is where community really the value of community comes into play, because to be redundant is going to chew up a lot of resources. But if you have one large cold storage room, maybe it took 2 or 3 times the effort to make it, but it's 10 times the size, and you're able to store up food for a whole community. So you're going to recognize how much more efficient it is to eliminate the redundancy and to build communally in certain elements, or maybe in the entirety of your lifestyle. So map that process out, and then map out, where does my heat come from, right? And maybe you don't need heat. Maybe you're living closer to the border of Mexico or something like that, where you really don't need that much heat. But the fact of the matter is, the vast majority of us, especially in Canada, you need heat, otherwise you die, right? So where's it coming from? Yeah, my furnace kicks on. I've got a pipe coming in, natural gas. I've never had an issue with it before. It doesn't go down, right? Yet. Yes, you're still reliant, right? And when we take a look at the agenda of the elitists, it's not to just enslave us, it's to eliminate a lot of us. Yeah. And so they will have no issue turning off the tap at some point in time and starving us out. But they're going to create a scenario that makes it look like it wasn't them. We need to put our blame elsewhere. It was just a catastrophic event. It was, a nuke from China. It was whatever, right? They're going to blame it on something else so that you don't direct your anger towards them. So map that process out. How do I get heat into my house, right? And then figure out, how do I make that sustainable? How do I ensure that I have enough fuel on the property to go a whole winter and be able to heat without relying on the system whatsoever? This, for many people, they've never entertained these thought processes before, so it can be quite intimidating. It's not that intimidating. It's not that hard. It just takes some time and effort, and this is when we work together, it comes together a lot quicker.
Yes. Yeah, if you were going to do it all by yourself, it is overwhelming. And even if you're just thinking about, becoming more and more sustainable and not necessarily providing all of your own needs, like you're talking about, even that you can feel like overwhelmed. Even starting a garden can be overwhelming for a lot of people, but it's like, once you do it, once you try it, once you think about it, once you look at it and start, it's not actually as bad as you might think. And most of our grandparents did a lot of these things. It wasn't that long ago that we had a lot more self-sufficiency than we do now. And a lot of it is a lot, I don't even want to say easy, more accessible than we think, and we're a lot stronger than we think, and we're a lot smarter than we think. But especially working together, then, like you said, we can get a lot more done a lot more easily and support each other. And it becomes easier and easier. And it's a beautiful thing. Like you said, you get a lot out of it that's more than just food and heat and whatnot. And I think that's part of what we've been missing all along, and that we're all secretly isn't the right word, without really knowing it, we're all like yearning for it.
Yes.
And a lot of the things that we try to fill our lives with now is just trying to replace that thing that we don't even really know what it is. So, exactly. And I don't know, sorry, go ahead.
What?
Oh, I was gonna say, do you feel like, because I always also think about this, once you go and you start actually creating this, now you're even more targeted. So everybody here, everybody listening to this, we're all on some kind of a list, just at least as like the free thinkers who might do X, Y, and Z. But once you go and actually start doing it, they're like, okay, the people who are like working on it and doing it, now you're on this like special list. Do you feel extra targeted since you started doing these types of things, or do you feel like this is something that you have to sort of, I don't know, live extra carefully because of, or anything like that?
Well, like I said off the start, I don't govern myself out of fear. And a lot of that probably comes because I've already faced a lot of those circumstances that would
Yes.
incite fear in people.
Right.
My family's been targeted for over 2 decades now. You can go back in time there. I'm not sure what's all available online. I've got old yellowed newspaper articles from the late 90s in relation to my father taking on Canada Revenue Agency, which is the equivalent of the IRS, and smearing them across the country on a national media campaign and exposing their lies and corruption. And then it was a short period of time after that we were in the courts with Health Canada after the first study came out on our supplements showing it to be over 3 times more effective than antidepressants. So, we've been we've been spotlighted by the government. We've been targeted by the government, and then sure enough, when the medical system killed my son, suddenly they falsify the cause of death and tried to put me and my wife in the spotlight, and they absolutely destroyed us in the media, our reputation, everything like that. And so I've already kind of been through that, like the targeting,
to say the least.
yeah, and at the end of the day, I still need to do what's right and not allow any fear to deter me from doing it. Like I've had people come out and say online when I've been advocating for community for almost the past year now. I mean, coming up in January will be the first time that I started to actually actively advocate for it. And I've had people come out and say, they'll never let you do it. They'll never let you do it. Well, you know what? I'd rather try and have them come in and destroy it than to not try at all.
Yeah.
It's that simple. Because the alternative is, if they're not going to let you do it, but you do nothing, you're still in their hands.
Yeah.
I would rather try and fail than not try at all. But chances are, when you come together, the government isn't all powerful. These are made up of people that shop at Walmart. They're people that are under the same fears that most other people are. They don't all of a sudden think I'm in government and so I'm immune and I'm powerful. They don't think that way. Yes, some bullies get in there and they love to do their thing, but they're on a power trip because of the fears that they've grown up with, and that they think that somehow they can remedy those fears by experience or exercising dominion over other people.
Yeah.
But the fact of the matter is, these are people. They're just people that make up the entirety of the government. And so there is actually nothing to fear there. There isn't. In fact, there was recently, I heard word, and so I can't validate this 100%, but I heard word that locally there was a police officer who was over top of a particular detachment close by who's had dealings with my family, and he retired. And he put out the message to come to our family that he's retired. And this is interesting. He went on to say, from this individual that's communicating the message, that our family isn't as crazy as they thought we were, meaning that even they're starting to awaken. So they're going to begin to turn their own swords on each other because there's an awakening happening within the government as well. They are not a unified body that is going to destroy the people. Yes, there's going to be some people that go down. It's similar to the water buffalo who crossed the Nile, right? When they go to cross the Nile, there's always a first or second or third water buffalo that goes in, and the crocodile will take them down. But the fact of the matter is, most people or most of the water buffalo get through just fine, right? Yeah. And so there's always going to be a sacrificial lamb, hypothetically speaking, or metaphorically speaking. But that's just the nature of it. So I would rather try and succeed or fail than not try at all and know what the outcome is going to be.
I love that. I have a duty. Yeah. Yeah, I love that that's his half-assed apology almost. Like, just go tell them that they're not as crazy as they thought they were. Like, okay, thanks. But it is cool, like you said, it points to the like chink in the armor that it isn't this unified whole, and that's really important for people to remember that humanizing aspect of it, that the government isn't this all pervasive, all knowing. And that's what they want us to feel like, that they can see everything, hear everything, know everything, do anything, that they're unstoppable. But like you said, they're just people. And there's a lot of them that aren't as unified with the sort of program or message as we might think. And even if it came down to, I think about this a lot, if they had like the military or whatever coming around door to door doing whatever, even then there's going to be people doing that are doing it because they don't know what else to do and they're scared and they haven't thought of this before and they're just going along, but they're still going to have their hearts intact. And you're still going to have some people who are like hiding people over here or like letting go, I don't see you running over there, or whatever it is. There's always going to be that element of non-cohesive, action on their part. So it's really good reminder. And I also want to mention to everybody listening, because some people I think didn't listen to or see our last episode together. And so they're like, wait, what happened to your kid and all this? So please go watch that previous episode and listen to it, because this is part of David's story that's really amazing and, takes a lot of courage and more, that it's almost superhuman, and it's a really incredible story, but it also really points to how corrupt and how evil some of these people are. So as much as they're not this cohesive, united whole, there's the basic undercurrents of the government in general, and their plans are pretty dark. So it's an excellent episode to watch. But I do want to stick with our topic tonight, on community and courage. And we're really, I think, delving into the courage part of things, where it isn't just, I think for a while it's like, oh, wouldn't it be nice? It's ideal if we can have like a community, or if we can live like this, or if we can like grow our own food, or yeah, maybe someday we'll try that. But we're really getting to the point where it's like, do or die, like you got to find that courage and do it, or what? I don't know. I don't really want to know, but I'm sure we're going to find out. And I don't think it's going to be pretty.
Yep. As soon as the road checkpoints come into play, that we're almost beyond action at that point in time, unless you're going to be leaving the cities with the backpack on, which is actually should be maybe another subtopic to this conversation about preparations that can be made. Bag. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, a bug out bag, 72-hour kit, call it what you like. I prefer a really nice backpack. I have a couple of them. I don't just have one bug out bag. I have different bug out bags depending on the situation, because I used to do a lot of traveling, and I never left on a work trip without it, right? That's and without a game plan. I always analyzed the risks in different situations of, what could take place there, environmentally, governmentally, whatever, and I always had a game plan, right? And I wasn't paranoid, and I wasn't obsessive. No. It was just, that's the way that my mindset's been. I've been preparing for over 18 years now, so it's the way that it goes. But going into the courage aspect as well, there was one thing I want to say that I don't think I would do this conversation justice if I didn't make mention as well, that when we set out to do that which is right, there's a higher power, and we had this conversation. Call it what you will, right? For me, it's God. It's the creator of the heavens and the earth. There's a Amen. Higher power that will be present with you when you set out to do the right thing, and you never know what the outcome is, but you will be fascinated at times to see the miracles that will take place. Like when I take a look at the past experience, past, we're almost sitting at 8 years of going through the courts and the lies and the millions of dollars that have been levied against us and government money to try to take us down. And, we were depleted in our resources, and I self-represented in court, and it was amazing to see. It's not because of my intellect or anything like that. There is a higher power that will guide you through this process. And so don't ever let the fear of government or the fear of your enemies or the fear of whatever's out there deter you from doing the right thing. When you set out to do the right thing and you trust, you'll see, metaphorically, you'll see mountains move.
Absolutely. I'm with you. I've experienced it. I love it. And I also want to add to that you can ask for that help and guidance as well. And it comes to you.
And you should. Yes. Ask and you shall receive.
Agreed. Yeah, I love that reminder. That's a very, very powerful, and it's true. And I think that that's part of what I always try to remember too when I'm talking about, like, even if it gets to this point where people are coming to your door and there's going to still be some people with hearts, is I'm basically reminding myself that even at that point, miracles can occur too. And, you can, I think that force that exists in everybody and everything all the time. And it can, possibly encourage people to remember their heart or, act in a certain way in a certain moment. So, and that's just one of many aspects of what types of miracles could occur. And you really don't know. And if you haven't necessarily experienced that, then don't limit your belief, don't limit your ideas of how amazing it can be, because I think it can be pretty amazing. So that really bolsters the courage that you can have, because you're not alone in any given moment in this. And it really is a spiritual battle, and it really is a spiritual life that we're having. And it's every single topic that I touch on, I like to touch on the spiritual in some way. But this one, I think, kind of is like the ultimate spiritual purpose for living,
Absolutely.
It's like you're getting to the purpose of living. Like, what are you here for? Right. And like we talked about earlier, if you're here just to like acquire a certain house and a certain spouse and, a certain career and then die, like, I mean, I guess that's what you want to do. I'll try not to judge you, but like, do you really think that that's what you're here for? I don't think that that's what we came here for. And I think there's a lot more to it. And getting to that point is always like taking some of their weapons away from them, right? Because you're remembering like, oh, I'm not just like a slave, and I'm not just here for this. And actually, I have a lot of agency and choice and power in what I can do and how I can do it. And now not only do they have less weapons, but you have a couple more, and you're leveling the field there. And it's just all in your mindset, just switching that little perspective around.
Changes everything. Absolutely.
Yeah. So, I don't know. I mean, I want to like keep talking about this forever, but I'm not sure what else we wanted to touch on. But I also wanted to get to the water buffalo. I wanted to mention about the water buffaloes. This is like something that a couple people who've been on the show have mentioned over time. And I don't know exactly where I stand with it, but, people have said such things like, if you are the person who is almost like the martyr or the sacrificial lamb or whatever you want to call that water buffalo who happened to get swept away in the not crossing of the Nile, that you actually get like more treasures in heaven, or however you want to talk about that. Like your spiritual rewards will be even greater. And so, not that you want to aim to be that buffalo, but but if it happens, like, maybe there's something to that. I don't know. I have to mention it.
That conversation came up initially back in, I think, about 2006 or 7 with me. Somebody else brought it up with me. We were talking about issues of taxation and my standpoint on that, which is a whole nother conversation.
Taxation is theft.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Taxation is theft. And I'm against feeding the beast that's trying to take us down, right? Feeding the beast that loves to vaccinate children, that loves to engage in organized murder under the guise of war that's necessary for the defense of the nation. No, it's not. That loves to abort, children, millions of children every year. I'm just not supportive of that. And so I have a moral obligation not to support that. So this conversation goes back way over a decade. And the individual has said, "Are you sure you want to be the first water buffalo to cross the Nile? Right? Like, you sure?" I said, "Well, I don't care, right? Yeah. In that sense, like, I have an obligation, whether I be the first or not. I don't care. Am I sticking my neck out? Right? Is my head going to get lopped off? Maybe, but at least I knew I did the right thing. And whether or not there's more rewards in the life to come because of that." That isn't even on my radar. I do not care, because I know in this very moment, by me doing the right thing, I'm already rewarded for it with a clear conscience that I can then share with my children, that I can share with those around me, that the reward is already here. So whether or not there's anything more to come in the life to come, do I care? Not really. That'd be great. Cool. Why not? But the fact of the matter is, my motivation is the effect that it has on me here and now by doing the right thing.
That's absolutely true. I love that you said that. And I love the idea that this is, a matter of sort of principles and principle. And when you have those principles and principle, and you can live according to those morals and standards for yourself, that you are, like you said, making your own sort of soul a little lighter and your own conscience clear, and that's its own reward. But you are also clearing the way for everybody else to do this thing, even if it's on like this almost like spiritual or mental level where it's like the 100th monkey thing, like every time we do something, it's like in the field of all existence, it's like that much easier or clearer for someone else to do that. Or whether it's like the water buffalo where it's like, no, literally, like some of us have to go first for all of us to be able to go. Either way, you're making this path a little bit clearer for everybody else. So you're creating that, and that's a huge amount of service, and you don't even have to look at it that way. It's still what's happening, right? You're like living in service to other people by being that true to yourself and being a principled person of morals.
Yeah, I guess I've had a lot of people say that, and it's sometimes it wants to go to my head, but I'll receive that, and I thank you for that. But
I feel like you had that same response last time when I gave you that big of a compliment.
Probably. I have a hard time receiving compliments, and that's my pride playing in here. But the fact of the matter is that whether or not I receive accolades for it or not, it is so beneficial to live in truth, right? And not to compromise and say, well, if I go and do this, maybe I'm going to go to jail and I won't be with my children. So then you compromise your values. Well, the fact of the matter is that I would rather be in jail and have my children learn what it is to be principally based than to not be in jail and say it's okay to compromise our values so that, we, for another reason, right?
Right.
And I think my children would grow up in that situation when they get older and would respect and value that I had been willing to go to jail for something that was right than to compromise those values. Right.
Yes,
so even though they may have gone without a father for some time, but we and that's using an extreme situation. The only greater extreme situation would be, having your head lopped off by a guillotine. So you're willing to compromise in that moment. But the fact of the matter is, as little as it is to as big as of a contrast or a situation as it is, we have to learn to be uncompromising for the sake of truth. And our natural tendency will be to try to create all sorts of scenarios as to why it's better to compromise right now for any particular reason. But at the end of the day, it's not. And you have to live with that in your conscience, and it sears upon you. And so I'm not willing to go there. I've already had situations like that in my younger days where I've compromised. And I have lived with that regret in a sense, but also taken those experiences and reflected on them and learned from them and said, never again.
Yeah. And I think everyone can relate to that, even if they can't relate to the, going to jail or like whatever the extreme version might be. I think we've all compromised ourselves in some moments and seen the results of that. And whether it's on a physical, mental, spiritual, emotional level, we've seen that it's negative, the response to that. Compromising ourselves never feels good and it never weighs well with us. And in the end, we always end up having to heal ourselves from whatever that was. Who knows how many years down the road we end up doing it, right? So I think we can all relate to that and take that advice, if it's advice, to not compromise ever again. As much as possible, don't compromise at all. I myself have always suggested that that's the best way to go, but people always say like, oh, you always have to compromise because everybody has to whatever. I'm like, no, there's always a way where everyone gets what they need and nobody has to compromise themselves, right? But you have to look at compromise in that sense as like actually compromising yourself, not just like, oh, maybe I won't eat the whole cookie because someone else wants a cookie. Like not that kind of compromise. But yes, I always appreciate your point of view so much. And people are asking in the chat about permaculture and sort of how you personally go about doing your whole setup. And I wonder if you want to come back and do another episode where we can get into those types of things, because I know that's very interesting to a lot of people and to me as well. You can share some of your sort of methods of actual food production and storage and processing and all of that. I don't know if you wanted to, if you want to get into all of that.
Absolutely. Yeah, it'd be good to get into it. Now, a lot of it, I'm in my infancy on it. I've laid a large foundation to facilitate a lot of growth. But a lot of it's in its infancy still, and I've done a lot of experimentation, but I'm no expert in it. And so I'll put that out there right now that, I can guide people to resources. I can tell people about some of my experience. on a general basis in relation to soil remediation, making soil conducive to growing significantly, and that goes right back to my expertise in nutrition, based on what we've done to our supplements to make them so incredibly effective. All we've done is mimicked what nature does under ideal situations without the presence of synthetic herbicides, fungicides, pesticides, right? And so when you apply the same principles to soil that has been damaged, you can fully correct it and whatnot. So I can go into that type of stuff, as to what I've been doing there, and then also guide people to certain resources. Perhaps some of the best experience that I've had was in off-grid growing up north in the dead of winter when it was like -40, which is equivalent to -40 Fahrenheit, -40 Celsius is about the same. Wow. And so in the dead of winter, really cold, no real light, and yet we were growing a tremendous amount of produce up there. Yeah. And I actually showcased some of that if anybody wants to go on my Facebook page and scroll down about 25 posts, I think it is, to January. I think it's very late January is when I made that live stream. And it was mainly talking about the court case, but I walked into the greenhouse that we were operating off grid in the middle of winter up north, and showcased a little bit of what was going on. And that was my first introduction as to the benefits of community, because even if you had all the money in the world, one, the amount of time that it takes to man that greenhouse, you wouldn't be able to do on your own. Yeah. And two, to be able to, as a community, to bring that together, to build that type of structure and to make that happen, it takes multiple hands and different expertise and all that. And so it was tremendous how that was the fruits of living communally, that we were able to have an off-grid heated greenhouse, that we were able to produce all the power we needed to run various LED lights where we could grow in the dead of winter in the far north. And so, so I have some experience, but really, where my mindset is at this point is I've always seen in a very grand scope. And so I have laid a large foundation over the last number of years, but haven't got into the fine details of the permaculture aspect yet. We're not there yet. I planted my trees. I planted over 400 trees starting about 2014. They are not large enough yet that I've gotten into all of the fine details of having everything in between the trees and all that type of stuff to facilitate permaculture. So for me, it's an ongoing process. And so I can't provide a whole lot of expertise there because I'm still in the learning aspect of it, and I have a lot of books that I'm slowly reading as I get closer to that point in time that I need them. And I've saved a lot of books that won't come off the bookshelf for a number of years because I'm not ready for them yet.
Yeah. Well, that in itself is another really good tip, that having paper books is really important. I know years ago I was like, okay, I'm getting ready for the apocalypse. Like, let's print all these things off the internet, like keep them in folders. And I don't know what happened to all that stuff. I don't have it anymore, but but having books is a good idea because of that. Our electricity or our access to the internet could go away at any given point in time. And having people around you who know is probably best. Teaching each other is probably best, but having those books is a really good option.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So that's a good topic right there in relation to community is you need a good communal library. So in my communal library that I've started to build, I've got all of the books necessary to be able to do an off-grid community. For the most part, I'm probably lacking in a few small areas, but for the most part, the foundation of knowledge is there. I've got the principles of leadership and fellowship in a sense. So all the self-help books that get us to break down the barriers one between another, so that you can foster good, healthy relationships on a community scale. I've got a whole section on the principles of liberty and political economy, and so that you can continue to make sure that you don't dip into communism, because like I said, it's a fine line and you want to make sure you never cross that line because it's dangerous. Right? I
agree.
And so, so I've got all these different sections of books. I've got a whole health section as well on herbs and all that type of stuff. Even the local plants around here. What plants are edible, medicinal, all that type of stuff. And so even though I don't know it all in detail, I have access to it all. And that's very important because our ability to obtain knowledge will become limited as well. Just like the food will become limited, the fuel will become limited, our ability to travel will become limited. We're going to be locked down. And so you don't want to be caught unaware. So if you can get out of the cities, out of the system, and get yourself a good library as well, that you can kind of just shelf and have access to as time goes on, that's a good thing.
Yeah, that's a really good point with the library. So you want to have a library, you want to have tools, and you want to have a well.
Yes.
To get started, some land.
At minimum.
And I like the idea too about knowing your local flora and fauna and how to work with that. So if you're not, if you're not able to get your own established sort of farm and animal husbandry going on right away, that you can hopefully live off the local resources for some amount of time or supplement with it at least, or whatever it is. That's a really good, sustainable aspect to bring in as well. I do not know that anymore. I grew up in the Northwest and I knew a lot of edible foods and how to find them, what time of year, and all these things. And now I'm somewhere totally new and I don't know anything. So I don't know why I chose now to do that, but that's where I'm at. But yeah, I really feel like, again, we could probably talk forever about all of this, and your whole entire setup is really, really fascinating, and the path you've taken to get there is amazing. And really inspiring. And I think that any community that you're in is lucky to have someone, because I think one of those things that you need in a community, as you've sort of pointed to, is leadership and that sort of vision of how things could be and should be maybe. And so that's a really good example for people to see as well. But I want to also ask you, and this is totally random and off topic, but behind you, someone pointed out in the chat towards the beginning of the chat, you have both a flat earth map and a globe. Is this mixed messages? Do you have an opinion? Do you not want to comment, or is there anything you want to share about that?
I've never come out publicly and made any declaration on that, but you asked the question and you shall receive. Okay, once again, going back to the whole COVID thing, I'm an evidence guy. You show me the evidence, I can form an opinion. And the globe precedes in our house the flat earth map, but I was too proud to accept any information on the flat earth years ago. Somebody came and they started talking to me about it, and I just thought, you're crazy. You're ruining your reputation with me, right? Like, you've gone down a few points. But then they triggered something, and it had to do solely with mathematical equations, and I absolutely flourished. I never did homework in school. For some reason, I just never resonated with school. I graduated early from school just to get the heck out of there.
Yeah.
But when it came to the maths and the sciences, I excelled. Even though I never did homework, I excelled because I would almost ace every test, right? And so somebody, they said something in relation to an equation of the curvature of the earth, and I thought, I can tackle that one. Let me go see, right? So I started to delve into it back before they cut off all the information. Anybody who wants to look into flat earth today online, good luck. You're not going to see anything that's going to be beneficial to you at all. You're only going to get the smear campaign, because in February of 2019, YouTube shut down two main things. Access to information on 9/11 and flat earth. Now, they've also done the vaccine thing as well. So you have to ask the question, if flat earth isn't real, why are they hiding it from you?
Why attack it? Yeah.
So I started to look into the mathematical equations of it, the curvature of the earth, what you should be able to see. And let me just say this, is that when I delved into that deep, and I wasn't willing to receive it, I'm not a very flexible guy that way. If I have a belief system, you better show me some very compelling evidence for me to even consider changing that belief system. I stand pretty firm, which is a virtue and a vice. And so in this element, it was a vice at first because I wasn't willing to look into it for the first while. And so anyways, I looked into the curvature of the earth, and things just don't line up. Let me say that. and it made me go get this map, which, by the way, when you map out the flight paths that take place from the southern hemisphere to other places in the southern hemisphere, it lines up with that map, not with the globe. They're traveling additional thousands and thousands and thousands of miles every time that they go from, let's say, Sydney, Australia to Johannesburg, Africa, South Africa.
Yeah.
They're going up into Hong Kong, Dubai, and then back down. Why? But yet when you look at that map, it's a straight line.
You're like, oh, that's why.
So the flight paths correlate, but that's not what convinced me. I wasn't looking at circumstantial evidence. I was looking at the hard mathematical evidence. And so open your mind. I know for many people, I've been there. If you haven't considered flat Earth and you're not willing to consider it because you're so ingrained in the globe, break down those barriers. Yes, we self-identify, and this is the biggest paradigm shattering thing that we can experience because we saw this globe from the time that we were 4 or 5 years old. It's one of the first things we learned in school. It's going to be the last thing, or one of the last things that we ever consider being a falsehood that we've been indoctrinated with. But that's my personal opinion. And I had one brief original thought, in a sense. I live right by the mountains, and so I want to talk about this real quick. We're answering the question. And I'm driving home one day towards the mountains, and I have this epiphany. And so, I was curious about this, and I thought, years back, and I looked into how did they measure the height of the mountains back in, 1800s and do so accurately. And so I had this epiphany come up again. And at this point in time, I'm entertaining the thought process of flat Earth. And I thought, how can they do that on a curved Earth? Right? And so I went and looked into Mount Everest. And here's the interesting thing, right? How they determine the height of Mount Everest is you've got this mountain that's, I don't know what to use as an example. I got no mountains here. But anyways, you've got this mountain, and you've got these people that are way over here, 150 miles away. And how they're measuring the height of that mountain is they have an instrument that is perfectly level for the most part, and they do a triangulation with it, and they determine what the angle is, and they know what the elevation is that they're at. They move to another location, let's say 10, 20, 30 miles away. They know the distance between those two measurement points, and they take another angle. They now have two angles and a bottom side of a triangle. They can now create a right triangle with it and determine exactly how high that mountain is and how far the center point of that mountain is, right? Based on those two measurements. And here's what was interesting. Mount Everest, 29,029 feet. The measurement they got back in the 1850s, 29,000 feet. That's 99.9% correct.
Wow.
Literally. Right basically on the dot. 99.9% correct. What they never incorporated into that was the curvature of the Earth, and taking measurements from 150 miles. The natural curvature of the Earth would be over 14,000 feet of elevation drop. There's no way you could have got 29,000 feet from that. Another measurement that they took was from about 107 miles away. The difference is over 7,000 feet in curvature between those 2 points. There's no way possible that you could use simple, and they call it simple grade 9 trigonometry, to determine that the height of a large mountain like that in 0.1% of accuracy if the Earth was curved.
Really good point. That is one of the best explanation or examples yet. And I'm the same as you. When I started, I was like, people are really dumb now. Like, this is getting absurd. But I did the same thing. I went looking and I was like, I actually can't disprove this. And I also am really intrigued. And now I wonder if the Earth is flat. And I was like, what's wrong with me? But I'm like, there's nothing wrong with me. I'm a rational person. That's actually what's right with me. And, if we were all rational and honest, we would be brought to these sorts of conclusions more often, which would be very, very nice. This is totally, totally random and even further off the subject, but I just saw this thing on YouTube somewhere where somebody was talking about how they went to create a documentary about immigration. And they went to go look at it as a, pro-immigration, let everybody in endlessly, and let's be done with all of these like rules and boundaries and borders. And they went to show that immigration, is good for everyone. And they actually found out that illegal immigration is bad for everyone. It's bad for the immigrant. It's bad for, and wherever you stand on this, the whole point I'm bringing it up is that that person actually ended up changing their mind completely, because when they went to go investigate and do this documentary and interview all these people and like put all these stories into context, they had to admit that they had been wrong. And I was like, if everybody was like that, no matter where you stand on anything, that you can go and look at evidence and admit when you're wrong and update your ideas about things, because there's nothing wrong with being wrong. You just didn't know before, and now you know more. And so now you have a different idea. The world would be an amazing place.
Absolutely. And that goes, there's a point in case there that most of us succumb to our need for validation more than our desire to have the truth. And so, example,
good point.
My temptation is, like, let's say I'm looking at the flat earth thing, right? I didn't believe in flat earth. In fact, I had a very strong world model of how it operated as a globe. I wasn't ignorant to the facts there. There's a reason why we had a globe in our house. And so for me, I had a vested interest in the globe earth being correct because that's where my investment had been. And so my initial temptation is to seek for validation, which is the greatest enemy of truth. Man's need for validation is the greatest enemy of truth. Rather than going and seeking out the truth, what we'll go and seek out is videos that tell us, that give us a pat on the back and say, you're right. You're right. And they don't even have to be scientifically valid.
No. Yeah. In fact, most people don't require any reason or logic at all. They just need someone to tell them that they were right.
Yeah.
It's absolutely true. One of our downfalls. So maybe you'll be back soon to talk about farming and sort of the setups and how people can go about things if you want to share on that, even though you're not like an expert on it, but you have a lot of experience and ideas, and that might be very fun. So what else is coming up for you? Or do you have any, things that you want to tell people about, let them know that's going on? And please also tell us again about the products that you create, because I now have personal experience. I have a friend who was bipolar, has bipolar sorts of situations going on, and tried some of your products and has an extreme improvement in their situation just from taking that supplement alone. And so I also want you to tell people about that again, in case they didn't catch the last episode or don't know anything about it, so that they can also have access to this amazing, life-changing supplement.
Absolutely. Okay, so going on that topic real quick here. I mean, the benefit to sharing it is that it's so empowering to people, and I don't use that word lightly. I mean, it's even though the product, the main one that we deal with, is called Empower Plus. Yes. It actually stands for Essential Mineral Power.
Oh, cool.
And what we're doing is, when you take a look at it, you take a look at a chair and you have 4 legs on that chair. And if we were to take those 4 legs and label them with the essential nutrients that we need, you'd have vitamins, minerals, amino acids, and omega fatty acids. Those are the essential nutrients. If we go outside of the big proteins and all that type of stuff, I mean, protein ultimately breaks down to amino acids. But when you're not looking at the macros, but you're looking at the micros, that's what you need to have everything function properly in the body. And so what we've done in modern farming techniques is we've eliminated the mineral content in the soils and the mineral uptake into the plants. And so we are literally starving for nutrition with that one particular leg. And so if you chop a leg off a chair, you've got an unstable chair or an inoperable chair, right? That the other legs won't really do you that much benefit. Why? Because it's all 4 that work in synergy to keep it upright.
Right.
And so the same thing happens in nutrition. Amino acids will never perform the functions that they need. You can get all the protein you want, and you can even digest it properly, uptake it into your system, but it'll never do the proper job that it needs to do if you don't have the vitamins and minerals, which are the coenzyme factors that facilitate the production of hormones and neurotransmitters, right? So we've identified that deficiency in nature through our own family experience, where we had extreme mental illness in our family. And it caused my mom's suicide back in 1994, and my grandfather's suicide back in the 1970s. And we were going to see a lot more of it because my mom and dad had 9 children, and we all had these issues. So we have discovered a way to process those minerals, because we don't absorb rock form minerals. We've discovered a process that happens in nature that we can break down those minerals and facilitate a rapid uptake of them to then go and produce the various neurotransmitters like serotonin and dopamine, as well as hormones, insulin, and all that type of stuff, testosterone, estrogen, so that your body starts to regulate itself appropriately. And what's amazing is the way that we're created in perfection, really. When we have everything that we need, our body will do what it needs to do, and it'll eliminate these unnecessary diseases, right? Those diseases are merely a symptom in almost all aspects of just a nutrient deficiency disorder, or being bombarded with chemicals, which many times will only have a negative impact on you when you don't have the proper nutrients to facilitate the detoxification of those various chemicals that you've been exposed to.
Yeah.
So So yeah, that's where we stand there. We've been doing this for a significant amount of time. We've come under major opposition because, as you can imagine, the pharmaceutical industry never liked us. The first study
Yep.
came out showing 3 times more effective than antidepressants, and immediately Health Canada came down, and eventually they raided us at gunpoint with the RCMP SWAT team and all that to try to shut us down. We ended up in the court system and we won because the evidence was so compelling. Because more studies took place from free-minded researchers that were willing to put their neck on the line out of the States, because Health Canada shut down all studies in Canada at that given time in the early 2000s. So now there's 35 medical journal publications on this particular formula on its own. It's really just a broad spectrum multivitamin mineral, but it's produced in such a way that all the ingredients work synergistically and are extremely bioavailable, that they can actually do the job they need to do. So people, when they take it, will generally report higher levels of energy, greater level of focus, higher levels of cognition, clarity, and then reduction in stress. And so that's one of the big things. And I don't like to share it that often because people can take a look at it and say, well, you're biased. You're trying to just, promote your product. But it is one of the keys as to why my wife and I were able to literally go through hell, have a child killed by the medical system, and then end up in court over it. I end up in jail over it, 3 week solitary confinement over false accusations and withheld, destroyed evidence, medical evidence, and then go through this and endure it for that long and still be functional and still be able to smile at the end of the day. It is a huge component. And many people will say, wait a minute, that's all, I deal with a lot of Christians, right? And many of them will say, wait, that's up to God alone. Well, the fact of the matter is that God put us on this earth with everything we needed. And when we tamper with that and we don't have everything we need, we're not going to be able to rise up and become who God truly made us to be. It's that simple.
Yeah, they say humans do half and God does half, right? He gave you all the right tools, but you still have to put them together and use them in a way that gets it all done. So you can't just sit around hoping.
Exactly. God helps those who help themselves.
Yes.
And so when I take a look at it, and I personally am, I guess, self-identify as a Christian, though I think Christianity as a whole has been hijacked and whatnot. So I'm a very unorthodox Christian in that sense, that I'm just seeking for the truth, and I'm seeking for a personal relationship with God, and I want to hear. I want to know His voice, and I want to be led day by day by Him. And so I don't find myself in the same arena as many Christians per se. But what's interesting is that when I go through the Bible as well as the other books that were eliminated from the Bible, I find a lot of stuff in relation to instructions on how to maintain our physical well-being. And I don't think God is in the business of just having us have sculpted bodies that are high functioning if it didn't have a spiritual component to it.
That's a really good point. Yeah, absolutely. They all work in conjunction. We have various bodies, if you want to call them that, aspects of our body, whatever you want to say, but we have our spiritual, our mental, our emotional, our physical, and of course they work in conjunction, right? That almost seems like obvious, but it is true. And I think it's hard for people to, what do I want to say? It's hard for people to really understand it, I guess, until they experience it, how much some simple components can affect all of those aspects of yourself. And then when you get that back in balance again, how completely transformative it can be. And I haven't taken these supplements, but I've heard you talk about them. I suggested them to a friend, and I've seen what it did for them. And so I am now, another person who can attest to how effective it is. And so if you're out there and you're wondering if there's something that can help you, it's worth a try, right?
Absolutely.
It's not going to hurt you.
And the beautiful thing is, like I said, it's basically a broad spectrum multivitamin. And so this isn't something that's targeted with specific ingredients for mental health. It's holistic health. It's just, we're covering so many nutrient deficiencies and allowing the body to regulate all of the neurotransmitters and hormones appropriately so you feel good. And so anybody can take it. We have a lot of people that take it just for general health and will experience increased grades if they're going to school. Their ability to deal with conflict in relationships, even it just really takes the edge off things. It doesn't sedate you or anything. It just takes the edge off of things and allows you to really rise up and become more of who you're made to be. And I guess I went down one path in relation to the health aspect, the physical health aspect, and having that effect spiritually. But if I was to give a formula as to really how we got through everything, it was a synergy between both being nourished physically and spiritually, and them working fully dependently one on another. And so I've seen the contrast. If I didn't take my supplements and all that, and I was under high levels of stress, the fact of the matter is you're burning through a lot of nutrients when you're under stress, and all of a sudden those deficiencies occur, and all of a sudden I'm feeling depressed and just not myself. But the same thing would happen even if I was taking my supplements and I didn't dedicate the time necessary to foster that relationship with my creator. And so it worked in synergy. I needed both.
I love that. I'm in absolute agreement. In fact, I was thinking of that right before you said it. I was like, well, I have to like make sure I'm, meditating and doing all those things too. But when I'm doing that and eating well and taking care of myself, like I feel unstoppable. So,
Absolutely.
We really do have to take care of all those sides of ourselves. And I love that you are pointing that out. And I hope that people take that message seriously. I think that we really, as a society in general, undernourish our spiritual selves too. I think that's an understatement in itself. I think we almost like work to deny and cut them out and kill the spiritual sides of ourselves. And, there's a reason for that too. So definitely taking it all and doing as much as you can in those various areas is going to be best for everybody.
Absolutely. Yep. And that's really the business that we're in, is just trying to really allow people to become who they were made to be, right? To get rid of to get rid of the shackles of mental health conditions or hormone disruption or whatever, right? And it's just so rewarding to see people start to blossom, right? It's just there's nothing more rewarding than that, than being of service to your fellow being.
Absolutely. What a beautiful thing. Well, how can people find Empower and more from you? Or is there anywhere else that you want them to go looking or that you want to direct them towards?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you're on the state side or anywhere else in the world other than Canada, you go to truehope.com and you can find Empower Plus there, as well as a number of the other supplements that we also utilize from time to time. You see the inositol right behind me, I think.
Yes.
That one we use particularly for anxiety or PCOS or diabetes, type 2 diabetes. But it's a phenomenal. It just tastes like icing sugar, but it just alleviates anxiety immediately. So if you're prone to anxiety attacks, people use that in conjunction with the Empower Plus, while the Empower Plus is correcting that long term. If you're in Canada, you can find it in the vast majority of health food stores. And a number of the health food stores, it's been wonderful to see when they get trained up and understand the potential of the product and they start to recommend it. The return purchases that they have has made it so that a lot of the health food stores find it their number one seller because it actually creates a radical life transformation. And that's just beautiful. So a lot of the health food stores, especially in Western Canada, have had it for some time and have done very well with it. And we're just really working to situate ourselves out in the Eastern provinces as well. And so you can find it at most health food stores, especially in Western Canada. If it's not available in Eastern Canada, you can order it online somewhere, or just recommend your health food store carries the product, and we'd be more than happy to get it there. So
awesome. I love it. Yes. And what are your final ideas or thoughts that you want to leave people with at the end of this episode?
Wow. That's a tough one
just
today.
Take it all and encapsulate it.
Wow. Well, I don't know how I ended off the last show. I know how I end off a lot of shows when people ask the question, and it always has to do with the topic of love. Life without love isn't really life at all, really. And so actively work on finding that source of love. And through all my experience in going through hell, going through the battle being on my doorstep almost every day for a long time, sometimes easing off from time to time. But I've had to proactively make sure I have love in my life. Otherwise, it would be filled, that void would be filled with bitterness and anger and hatred and resentment and all that. And so what I've discovered is that God truly is love. God created us through love. This whole creation that we find ourselves on, whether you see yourself on a globe or on a flat earth, it was created out of love. And and we're nothing more than a product of love. And so if you can tap into that source of love, you'll find that your perception of life will change radically. You will see life differently. And when we're speaking about courage as a broad topic on this show, the very root of courage is love. You have two choices: govern yourself out of fear and see the effects of it. I've been there way too many times. Or govern yourself out of love and see with eyes clearly and watch the fear completely dissipate regardless of the circumstances around you.
Yeah, I love it. Love will conquer everything. Fellow travelers of the path, it is a beautiful thing. This has been your analog, electric, concentric dose of wisdom according to David. Stephan, David, you're amazing, and thank you so much for coming back again. It is always a pleasure to talk with you.
Thank you so much, Lindsay. Blessings.
Thank you. And just when you think you've hit a plateau or a wall, the universe conspires to invite you to climb up and over, to stretch out and get bigger, and to run ever faster toward your goal. Every crisis is an opportunity at the core, and it isn't a trite and shitty saying meant to make you feel like you should constantly and conquer anything that comes your way with ease. It's simply reminding you of a truth. You can use any food to grow, any stimulus to learn a new response, and any space opening up from the destruction of what is left behind in order to build new structures and develop new methods. Let the towers shake and fall. Whatever you've done to shore up your foundations and build upon the most firm of ground will pay off in keeping you solidly bending like any reed in that storm. And anything that crumbles was built on shit, not a part of you and meant to go. So until you master the art of using every struggle as a starting point, digging down deep to build the firmest foundations, and letting go of everything that fell away, travel well, aim for balance, and always look inside first. Mwah.
Beautiful.